You're listening to Overwatch Contenders Daily, your path to daily news, scores, and insights into the Overwatch League stars of tomorrow. Here's your host, LemonKiwi.
Fans, hope you're having a wonderful day. Overwatch Contenders Daily here. My name is LemonKiwi. My special guest on the left or right is Volamel. You know him as Joe. He's Overwatch writer, analyst, and I brought him here today to talk about a debate amongst the community, which is the patch cycles. I think you guys might have heard about the Overwatch League deciding what patch they want to be on for Stage 4, and this also applies to Contenders and Open Division, the other two tiers of competitive play in Overwatch. So the debate amongst the community is, when do those tiers or different levels of Overwatch competition get these new patches? So Volamel, for the newer viewers out there, could you explain how does each tier integrate a new patch once it goes to the live server?
So each of the divisions are kind of dictated, what it seems like, by different people. So each of the different divisions get their patches in a kind of staggered format, where it seems like Open Division plays on whatever's currently live for the most part, without too much pushback from Blizzard on what you can and can't play. It's usually just what's live is what's played, and you try to do with what you have. You try to make the best of the situation that you're given. And then in the second kind of tier of the Overwatch kind of path to pro, you have Contenders, which obviously there's a little bit more scrutiny on, the product that Blizzard's trying to show. So there's somebody there at Blizzard HQ that decides which patch is probably best fit for competitive play, while also trying to be fair to both sides of the kind of community, where you have the kind of the not necessarily casual, because I think that's a more divisive term these days, but I think there's two sides of a community there that you're trying to kind of give the patch to. And then obviously you have the kind of tier 1 division with the Overwatch League, where you try to have the most competitive patch while also trying to keep intact your competitive integrity with, not trying to throw in too many patches all within one cycle or one stage. Then you kind of eliminate any questions that maybe a team shouldn't be where they are or should be, higher of what they are. So there's a lot of questions involved with exactly how that happens, and there's not a ton of information other than, there is differences with the scenes.
And it just get confusing. I think, like I already mentioned, Stage 4 has now decided to play on patch 1.22, which is new Hanzo, but not nerfed, or new Hanzo and nerfed Brigitte will not be present. So actually the announcement came in, days before Stage 4 came around. In Open Division, they got new Brigitte, new Hanzo, new everything, and they were really struggling to kind of figure out where it sets in the meta. But in your opinion, what are the after effects, maybe the benefits or the consequences to the system and perspective of the players and the viewers and the developers to this sort of patch cycle between the tiers?
Sure, and that's kind of where I think the debate really starts to stem and come to a head. And I'm kind of on the side that it really shouldn't matter. But I think before we get into that, I think we all can agree, whether, what side of the debate you're on, is that Blizzard needs to be a little bit more open and kind of give us more information as a community on what's going on behind the scenes and what are some of the troubles, so that we can kind of, not necessarily brace people or kind of brace for impact, but, the day before. And it seems like from some of the other podcasts that, many of the Overwatch League coaches and, players have been on, that there was a kind of a break in communication there as well. So I think that's something that everybody can agree on, is that communication needs to kind of step up from Blizzard, and we kind of all just need to know exactly what's happening, if there's going to be a big substantial change, or if there's going to be a big substantial decision that's going to be made a day before. I think that probably could have been communicated probably weeks ahead of time. Now, in terms of the actual debate, I think that people are trying to find a scapegoat for the kind of decline in viewership that we're seeing. While I don't like the fact that we can't play, I'm not a big fan of the way that the patch cycling has been handled throughout Overwatch's lifespan. I think it's always important to roll with the punches and kind of take what you're given. Obviously, there's room for improvement, and I think there's plenty of room for criticism. But for the most part, I don't necessarily think the narrative of, because this isn't what I play in quick play or in competitive, then I don't care. I don't necessarily align myself with that. And there has been very few instances, if we look at like the history of esports, where that's actually been the case, where the live patch is what's been played at the highest level. There are instances where that does happen, but I think more often than not, the competitive, the highest level of competition does tend to try to catch up to the live servers as much as they can. But obviously, there's always that kind of staggered nature to that. And then a lot of people always bring up the fact that, there's probably the biggest difference in the player bases probably came from League of Legends during the kind of lane swap meta, where basically the first 15 minutes of the game was completely different from what the kind of normal player was seeing in their games, which I agree is kind of a problem, especially because they kind of are not disincentivized, but they could be turned off by that because it is so drastically different. But I don't think that, maybe having a different ability or having some numbers tweaked is that different to see a drop in viewership. I think there's plenty of other reasons why that is, and I don't think it has really anything to do with the patch, really.
Well, I think is it League that they write the patch that they're playing on?
Yes.
Is it League, or there's different games that actually indicate what patch they're playing on? Maybe
Yes.
that would sort of help. Like if you're watching Contenders, it'd be patch 1.23 and Overwatch League 1.22 or whatever. Maybe that might help a little bit. Although then you'd have to be a hardcore fan to know what that patch even means.
Definitely. I think that information, I think that's where the debate really needs to kind of come to an agreement, where I think there just needs to be a little bit more information given, especially on broadcasting of what's going on. I think, when we look back at Apex, which was kind of the pre-Overwatch League, one of the more prestigious events in South Korea, where they were very clear on what patch was being played, what the patch notes were. They kind of gave you a brief rundown, and the viewer was now kind of set in the mindset of, okay, maybe this is what I'm not seeing in my games themselves, but I know exactly what to look for now. And so I think that could be improved on.
And do you think that might be hard for the players that are maybe coming from Open Division? They get Brigitte and a different Hanzo, then they come to Contenders, where I don't think we know, or at least I don't know personally, what patch Contenders Trials will be on. Yeah. So that
it's definitely an issue. I don't feel for Blizzard there. It is I do feel for Blizzard. I should reiterate that. It is a big undertaking to kind of have a very structured tier 3 scene that is kind of, again, brought in-house. They're controlling for the most part exactly what's happening there. There's a lot of overhead work and kind of administration work that needs to be done there. But if that's something that they want to do, then this is the kind of the rules and information that needs to be properly communicated to the players and the community. So I think that, while I feel for them in terms of the amount of work involved, if this is how they want to structure things, then I think that probably needs to be done.
And then the next debate comes where the new Brigitte, Brigitte, the new hero, and then Hanzo rework has, once they came out, it felt overpowered to a lot of the community. They definitely needed some tweaks and stuff like that, and came out fresh on the live patch. People were upset and whatnot. Some people were upset, some people were fine with it, but then there's already tweaks happening to Hanzo. There's already nerfs coming in for Brigitte. So do you think that these patches are spending enough time in PTR before they're getting pushed to the live server?
That's a question that is not difficult to answer, because I do think that more time needs to be spent in the PTR for the most part. But there's a lot of things behind the scenes that there's conflicting kind of evidence supporting either side, where Blizzard is, there's rumors, or there's people saying that Blizzard is saying that they don't have enough people playing the PTR at the highest level, so they can't properly test it. And then you have plenty of pros coming out and saying, well, I've been saying this for months and weeks and, multiple months that this is a problem, and there hasn't been any, kind of feedback given on that. So it is difficult to kind of gauge who is kind of right there. I would tend to it's even kind of difficult to kind of tend to agree with anyone there. If anything, I probably have to side with the players there, because I know for a fact that there is a large community of players that do give their feedback. Whether or not it's necessarily listened to, that's something that we can't ever know. And that's not to say that Blizzard doesn't listen to it, but it's difficult to know exactly what's happening once the feedback is given. But yeah, for the most part, I think that PTR patches, and again, we have seen this with Brigitte, that they have changed their kind of stance for them, from what we can only assume, which will be a theme going on in the future, that they're going to take a little bit more care, especially with large changes to their game. When we saw Brigitte being added, she was in the PTR for quite a bit. Now with these changes to Hanzo, yeah, I think they were quite a bit rushed, and there wasn't a lot of feedback listened to, it felt like, because again, the biggest kind of narrative that's gone on with Blizzard's balancing of Overwatch has been they're very reactive to what's happening, and not necessarily trying to be too proactive in their approach. Obviously, with a company the size of Blizzard, there's probably a lot of things behind the scenes that we just don't know about, so there's probably a lot of checks and balances that they have to go through to kind of pass that through. But for the most part, to answer the question, yes, I think PTR needs to be explored a lot more for Blizzard, and I think that these changes, I would love to see an actual a group of players that, maybe not even are in the Overwatch League anymore, possibly even retired, that come in, work with Blizzard for, kind of not necessarily quality assurance, but just give them, have them in-house, kind of at home, to kind of give you what a player's feedback would look like, and have them really kind of dig into the nitty-gritties of the game and just really break it down.
Well, I think Blizzard has done a good job, as you said, of being reactive, less on the proactive side, but it feels like, when people were unhappy with Mercy, they went and reworked Mercy. When Hanzo was overpowered, they, reduced his damage. When Brigitte, people weren't happy with it. I feel like they're tending to the issues after the fact, and at least that's a positive, because I come from games where there's a glaring issue in a game or a bug, and it doesn't get fixed for months. So
for sure.
Yeah.
That's a great, thing about Blizzard, that they've always been very keen on being very flexible. But when you are kind of trying to host a multi-million-dollar, possibly billion-dollar league in the future, then I think that needs to be kind of innovated on a little bit more. And I think they really need to nip things in the butt before they get live. I think, yes, they're always going to have metagames that are a little bit more oppressive than others. I think that's not what we're saying here. I think what we're saying is that the PTR has felt very neglected for the most part, because, when we have something like Bastion, if you remember the old Bastion patch where he had like 40% reduced damage when he was turreted, multiple, armor stacks, it was very blatant that was going to be kind of silly. And it went live, and then they immediately went back and fixed it. So it feels like there's some disjointedness there that I think could be looked at. And I think, probably Blizzard knows this, and, hopefully maybe come season 2, we're going to have a better patch cycling system that I think probably solves that issue regardless. But yeah, PTR just needs a little bit more love.
And I think some people were also mentioning that, the patches, like you say, kind of come unannounced at times or in the middle of seasons. And some people were suggesting, well, what if you schedule the patches around the Overwatch League schedule? Do you think that's possible, and would that be beneficial?
So it's something that we've all kind of said since the beginning. I think probably the earliest person that I've seen talk about it was probably Harsha, who is now one of the coaches for San Francisco Shock, who kind of put forth the model, or to kind of replicate the model of how Hearthstone does their balancing with seasonal changes. Now, I don't know if publicly announcing the fact that this is going to be tied to the Overwatch League is exactly what they want to do, because I think that would drive up a lot of negative press for the Overwatch League, because then it feels like, I could see a lot of the kind of, more casual community coming in and being like, oh, why are you changing the game for the pros? Now we feel neglected. Right. So I think that you could change exactly how the patches come, but I don't necessarily think it has to be strictly on the Overwatch League schedule. I think that there's a lot of interesting things that they've done in other games, especially with Hearthstone. I think they've really done it right with Hearthstone, where they have kind of not necessarily themes, but there's kind of a thematic element to, when a new season comes, what does the patch look like? And I think that seasonal changes for the most part would be interesting to tie them in with seasons, but that also probably means extending and changing again what each competitive Overwatch season looks like, just as like for the ladder, just talking about the ladder and how the seasons look like there, that probably then has to be extended. And there's probably more, you know, art assets and, you know, balance testers you probably have to hire with that. You know, there's probably lots of things that, you know, my tiny pea brain can't wrap its head around. So I would agree that the patch cycling needs to see an improvement and see a kind of an overhaul, because it's difficult, again, you know, to be put in Blizzard's shoes when they want to play this patch, you know, 1.23, but there's a bug. And do you then sacrifice, you know, competitive integrity to hopefully you don't have to deal with the bug to play on live patch so that everybody's happy? Or do we nip that in the butt first and then play on an old patch, which again, you kind of then question the competitive integrity as well, because teams really haven't had that much time to play on it. So it's a catch-22, and neither one is great. So I think they went with probably the safer choice there and just did whatever was the safest, probably.
I mean, we've both pointed out, or mostly you have pointed out, improvements that could be made to the patch cycling, and we've sort of shown the discrepancy between Open Division, Contenders, but Overwatch League at the end, and how an immense job that Blizzard has to help regulate all three of these scenes. And of course, maybe not enough people playing PTR, therefore not having enough feedback, or do they have enough feedback? What is the communication issue, or what can be improved in that department? I think we'll have a better system as Overwatch League progresses, and as Open Division expands. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more balanced and equal between all three tiers, but Overwatch League getting the how do I say it, the more hashed out patch, because there's so much time spent on the patch before Overwatch League gets it, that it's almost, they'll get the unbugged version and the most balanced and tested out version, hopefully.
Here's to hoping, you know, that they try to go with the most balanced version. And I think that inadvertently, that's what happened with the patch 1.22 and 2.3 kind of scenario, where I think if we were to be playing on 1.23 and there wasn't a bug problem, I think you were going to see a very strict meta, a very rigid meta. Whereas now that we're kind of thrown a loop and maybe teams are thrown a curveball, they're in kind of meta purgatory, where it feels like right now, where nobody has had the time to really figure out what's amazing and then practice that, and B, it seems like the meta again still is very open, where, you know, there are people that are, you know, calling for the death of dive, where teams are still like, yeah, we can run dive, it's not that big of a deal, it's more map dependent now. So it does feel different. And to kind of side note, you know, as much as I do, as much as this may have been a kind of criticism of Blizzard and what they could improve on, you know, I think they have the foundation in place, especially with a frontward facing person, and Jeff Kaplan, you know, Jeff from the Overwatch team. You know, he has that presence within the community, so that you actually do have an outlet for kind of any and all changes and information to relay to the community that's probably going to be well received, especially when it comes from Jeff. So I do have to applaud Blizzard in that sense, that they've been very long-term focused in that sense, where, you know, most companies kind of need that person to come out there, that kind of spokesperson. You know, that's not his title, but it's his kind of community given title almost.
Yeah, he's kind of become that with the developer update, and he had the fireplace meme. He's just become the spokesperson. And yeah, the developer updates, I agree, they come out with explaining what they're doing, and sometimes you don't get that voice from the developers of why something comes in, or what is it for, or what do they think, why are they putting this in. And they have been very transparent with the changes that they have brought in, and how they are trying to listen to the community after the fact. But this has been a very interesting interview, the patch cycling, and I'm trying to understand it all, and I'm sure the viewers at home, you guys are trying to understand it yourselves at Open Division, how maybe different it might look from the Overwatch League, but there is a reason, there is definitely a reason, at least from the developers and whoever from Blizzard deciding these things of why Open Division gets it first, Overwatch League gets it last. But this was Volamel, such an intelligent guy. You guys got to go follow him. He writes articles about other Overwatch topics that you guys should check out. But thank you so much for coming on, man.
Hey, no problem. It was a pleasure talking with you and really kind of tackling a subject that I felt like it tends to be shied away from especially because it is kind of divisive. But I think that, a conversation needs to be had, and, whether or not this answered questions, which, probably raise a lot more questions than answered, but I think now we have at least the kind of staging ground of, what possibly could change in the future.
And this is all a testing ground. I mean, Overwatch League hasn't been around for that long that it's a perfect system, and no one would expect it to be. But as a community, we are being heard from the developers and people that are organizing these leagues, and the changes are coming in as fast as probably they can. But that will end our interview. Let us know in the comments what your opinion is on the patch cycling between Open Division or the whole path to Pro. We'd love to hear from you. But this was Overwatch Contenders Daily. I'm LemonKiwi, and we're going to see you guys next week.